Hi, my name is Whitney Ham, and I'm one of the job coaches for Virginia Commonwealth University, and this is my coworker, Alissa Brooke, and we currently both work over at a research project serving individuals with autism. We work with young adults who are employed out in the community. So what we're going to do today is a job match case study application, and this what we're going to do is we're going to work through 3 different case studies of individuals that we are currently supporting, and then so that you guys can get a feel for working with young adults with autism in the community. So first off, autism in the workplace. It can be an invisible disability. So when these individuals, they look like typically developing people, they look like you and I. So some of the behaviors that they might present with in terms of their communication or physical behaviors, this can be a bit more disconcerting when interacting with them because they don't look like they have a disability. So as you can imagine, this might present certain types of challenges in the work environment and might lead to the need for education and awareness training out on the environment as well. And what we also wanted to do is, as we're working through these individuals, talk about what sorts of things you want to consider when making a good job match for these individuals based on the behaviors and their individual characteristics. So first we're going to meet our clients. And here is our first individual. His name is Daniel. Some personality characteristics about Daniel. Daniel is incredibly organized. He comes to work the same time every day. We have a schedule written for him, and he's so organized, so his lunch is always packed the same way every single day, the exact same 1 chicken tender, a bag of pickles, a bag of cheddar cheese sticks, and also the same drink every day. He's very detail-oriented. He follows his schedule to a T. He also does very well with a routine and with high expectations. So he prefers to have a routine and to know what to expect every single day when he is going into work. If there's going to be a change in his routine, then he prefers to know about it as soon as possible, and he also likes it to be written down. As far as we have high expectations under here, Daniel is someone that he has kind of a lack of self-confidence. He wants to make you proud, he wants to do well, but he asks a lot of questions and I guess requires a lot of reinforcement in order to feel confident in the workplace. He is also friendly. And from friendly, we're going to move into some of his communication characteristics. While he is friendly and very interested in relationships, due to the way that Daniel presents, it can be hard for other individuals to understand or to know how to best communicate with him. He sounds very sarcastic when he is speaking with you, and it comes out more like, "Hi, what are we doing here today? I'm so happy to be back at work." So the way that he presents is not really demonstrative of how he actually feels inside. He really is happy to be at work, but his communication style is just, it's sarcastic, it's kind of quiet. He doesn't present as a happy-go-lucky guy. He also doesn't have much of a filter. So while he's interested in these relationships and learning how to have a conversation, sometimes he'll ask questions that aren't quite appropriate. These can be questions of his coworkers surrounding pregnancy or surrounding certain things that they might like to do on the weekends. Sometimes he gets in fights with his mom at home, and we'll come and talk about what the fight is about, and he didn't always react very appropriately and can sometimes be aggressive at home. We don't see this at work, but Daniel doesn't always understand why you might not want to tell your supervisor that you hit your mom the night before.
Yeah, or walk around and telling a coworker that they really need braces.
Yes, things like that. And he's very honest. He will readily admit that he told his coworker that she needed braces, and he thought that he was doing a nice thing and helping her out with this. So all of this, as you can see, can also kind of create a lack of boundaries, knowing things that you can say to your job coach, things that you can say to your supervisors. Do you have something to add with that one, Alissa?
Nope.
And also perseverates on a few topics. And he does happen to be quite knowledgeable in these topics. Daniel's preferred topics are werewolves, the Transformers, and Godzilla. He also really loves the weather. So if you are wondering what % chance of rain there is for that day, whether it be 5% to 85%, Daniel will often, he's our lunchtime weatherman. So the challenge is the communication, as we had already mentioned. He is interested in communication, but he requires a lot of support for how to appropriately communicate. Sensory challenges. Daniel is someone that came to the workplace, and he does happen to work in a hospital, so we have a lot of liquid hand sanitizer. And this sensory thing was very uncomfortable for him. He didn't like to do it. He used to walk around actually with a bag of bar soap so that he wouldn't have to use the liquid soap. Also, scripting in public areas. We talked about the topics that he tends to perseverate on, and if he doesn't necessarily have a physical person to talk to, Daniel will often just continue to have the conversation by himself. Anxiety. He is very anxious, and whether or not this is a separate disorder from the autism or just part of the autism, he does take medication for it, but his anxiety will increase with certain, like we had mentioned, changes in the routine. If there are weather, if there's a snow day coming or if there's a hurricane on the rise, you will see Daniel's anxiety really increase, and sometimes his performance at work will decrease with this because he's more concerned about the weather and being safe than getting his job done. We mentioned the lack of confidence. Daniel often requests more support at work than is actually needed. So we have made rules for him, and you'll actually get to see one of his supports a little bit later, surrounding how many times you can ask if you're doing a good job. Daniel's skill set, strong work ethic. This is someone that once he has a schedule, he's going to show up to work and he's going to get everything done on his schedule on time. He's going to finish it to completion. He has a lot of anxiety about leaving work unfinished, and so he often has a hard time starting a new task if he thinks he's not going to get it finished, because he's a hard time going home for the day if he hasn't finished everything that he needs to get done. Also, ability to follow a written schedule. I wrote one schedule for Daniel that said clock out at 1:30, and for the past 6 months, he will wait until exactly 1:30 on the dot to clock out. So if it is written, it becomes law. Very skilled with technology. We have used iPods to support Daniel in the workplace. We have eventually, which is a skill set, especially in today's, I guess, kind of environment. Everyone has iPhones. People have iPods a lot. So he was able to utilize that, but due to some of his interests with fan fiction and weather, we decided to go back to paper supports for Daniel. Also an excellent recall. Once he goes through a task a few times, he really doesn't need any more repetition. Due to his anxiety and confidence, he does prefer to keep the written supports, but they usually aren't needed. Mm-hmm. What can cause frustration for Daniel? Usually the receiving correction, work-related and social. Because of his desire to please you, receiving correction can be very difficult for him, and he can also perseverate on this and will apologize multiple times. Changes in his schedule can cause frustration. Forewarning makes a big difference for him. Fights with family members, as we mentioned before. If his support network is not as stable as he prefers it to be, then that can create anxiety in the workplace. The weather, and also noises. We've actually had to change his work schedule around. He works on a cardiac unit at the hospital, which has a lot of beeping with the machines, particularly when patients come back from surgeries. And so we've had to work his schedule around when there aren't a lot of patients. They're still in their in receiving surgery, so that doesn't have to be as exposed to as much of the beeping. So his learning needs a very detailed schedule, and that's more to provide a sense of comfort and routine, and give Daniel a sense of confidence and facilitate his independence in the workplace. Repetition. He does require some repetition, at least a few times, and then once he has that, usually he does better if we model it first, show him how to use the support, and then he prefers to kind of take it on his own. Mm-hmm. Also, very clear expectations. We mentioned the constant asking if he's doing a good job. If you are clear with your expectations of Daniel, and also that your expectations are high, he will do his best to rise to that occasion. Very clear instruction, we said multiple times, and also forewarning if there is going to be a change, which if you think about it, I like to know if there's going to be a change in my schedule as well. Also very firm and concrete. He doesn't need to be babied, even though some of his interests might be somewhat childlike, but very firm and to the point, and that way there's less room for him to have to try and interpret what you might be saying to him. So some questions to ask yourself. We thought that since you guys aren't here to actually interact with us, but these might be things that you might want to think about as we're introducing these individuals. So what else might you need to know to make a good job match? What sorts of environments and tasks would you look for based on what we have presented about this individual? What sorts of environments and tasks would you avoid? And what sorts of supports might be helpful for Daniel? And the current state of Daniel, he splits his time with the same nurse manager between the coronary care unit and the cardiovascular intensive care unit. We mentioned he works Monday through Friday. We mentioned his recent change in schedule where he works on both units depending on how many patients they have and when the patients are coming in, that he works on both units when it's a little bit slower and quiet and there aren't quite as many staff doing their rounds. We have also gone in and provided coworker education on how to appropriately interact with Daniel, and also on, it shouldn't just be his job coaches, Alissa and I, that are making staff aware of how to interact with him and how to make boundaries and appropriate communication style appropriate, or to have them comfortable letting him know when he is not being appropriate and to teach him how he should be asking questions or interacting. The tasks that he does, he stocks all of the rooms on both units and all of their patient bedside carts with supplies. And the supports that he uses, he has visual checklists and also a visual schedule. And we're going to run through another individual. This is Darnell, and he also is employed at a community hospital. Personality characteristics of Darnell. He is incredibly outgoing. When this individual enters the hospital or the cafeteria, you know that he is there. Once he knows your name, he knows it for life, and he will greet you every single day and ask how you're doing. You might get a high five or something. He's also very food motivated, which we had to learn the hard way with the first time that we brought Darnell into the hospital cafeteria. He's very creative. He spends a lot of his free time or any downtime at work actually drawing his comic book pictures. He is another individual who's very interested in Transformers, and he does beautiful drawings. He also currently does all of the artwork for his unit, so if they're having a party, he will do the invites. He's very funny, and he's fun to interact with. Do you have anything to say? I'm trying to think of a story about his humor. But we'll think of one eventually. And he's also always moving. This is an individual who has a lot of energy. He spends a lot of time boinging or walking around the hospital. And so when trying to find a job match, this was something that we really tried to take into account. His communication style, his voice prosody, it is very robotic radio voice. He actually used to do the Pledge of Allegiance when he was in high school. It's a great voice, sounds very nice, but it can also be very loud. He also has odd syntax. So you might hear, I like to say goodbye to you now, or Oda Spunkmeyer, live in the cafeteria. So that's part of what makes him funny, is just the daily interactions that you have with him.
Go ahead.
Oh. His learning needs, and you're going to see this a lot in our individuals with autism, repetition. He needs to see things a few times and also be made aware of the expectations with these routines before he learns them. He is very visual. Once again, if you make a schedule or write a daily plan for him, if it's in front of him, Darnell has a very strong compulsion to follow this plan. Clearly defined expectations. If he sees a little gray area in terms of food or parties or a time where he might be able to sneak off and get on the computer, then he might take that opportunity. So he needs to know exactly how he needs to behave in the workplace and what his expectations are as far as being professional. He too needs very firm instruction. He is kind of entering a stage in his life developmentally where he's kind of pushing his limits. He's getting a stronger sense of self, and he needs firm instructions when interacting with him. Environmental needs. Darnell needs limited access to computers and technology. So as much as he will follow a written schedule, if that opportunity presents itself to get on the computer, the reinforcement that he might get out of being able to see a podcast or something online is usually a little more fun for him than going to do his work. Very firm rules surrounding food. We have gone, I guess, so in depth with him as to make a list of exactly which condiments that he can take from the cafeteria and put on his food. Consistency, he likes a consistent schedule. He does well with the same routine day in and day out. And also he does well when working with similar staff members. He does need a schedule, and once he's accustomed to the schedule, there's a lot less of anxiety for him and also for the individuals that work with him. And he also needs clear expectations of how he is going to act that day. And sometimes he needs expectations not only for work, but also how to act in the cafeteria. And this can also be very, it can be a one-time thing. If somebody's having a birthday party or a baby shower in his unit, we might have to write down expectations for how to behave at that point in time too.
Once there is a rule set, though, he will follow that rule. Darnell had an internship before he was employed, and he was working on a unit where there were a lot of patients. And because he has that loud, booming voice, it was really important for us to create a rule for him. And the rule was, I whisper on my job site. And when that became a rule for him, he literally crossed the line to walk onto that unit, and he always whispered. So if he knows what the expectation is, he can meet that each time.
And let's see where we're headed next. So things that can cause frustration for Darnell. This would be a change in routine, and this is similar. A lot of our individuals with autism can be upset with a change in routine, and with Darnell, this can be hard for him because a change in routine does create anxiety for him. He's pretty excitable, so he might act out a bit more when he has a change, and he doesn't have the right amount of support to help him transition with this change. Also, correction. He likes to feel like he's doing his job the right way. And the correction can not only upset him, but also Darnell is someone that does very well with visual instruction. So if you're providing verbal correction to him, he might kind of feed into it and kind of get into a verbal sparring match with you. So it's usually best to write it down or remove yourself to prevent that escalation in behavior from occurring. Upset with support circle. Darnell is someone that sometimes has trouble expressing how he's feeling emotionally, and we were running into a lot of trouble with him on his job site, I guess about 6 months ago. And what happened was, after talking with his mom, we said, you know, we're just seeing behaviors from Darnell that we haven't seen very often before. And it turned out that he was having some fights with his parents when he went home at night, and his parents weren't getting along very well. And the way that we were able to see that things weren't okay for Darnell was with his work performance. Also, too much instruction. We mentioned that he doesn't do well with a lot of verbal interaction, so it needs to be written. So if you're providing too much instruction or talking to him like a baby, then he is going to realize that he might be able to get away with a little bit more, or you might just make him angry, and that will cause him to act out a little bit. The baby talk, this is a 23-year-old individual, so baby talk for him, even though his interests might be childlike or he might somewhat present kind of childlike, he doesn't want to be talked to like a baby. He wants to be treated like an adult, and he's also very capable of acting like an adult.
I think something important to note here is that these are all things that can cause frustration for anyone. A change in routine, being corrected, when you're upset with your family or your friends, too much instruction or feeling like you're being talked down to. These are all things that cause frustration for people. What's important to know here is to know the individual that you're working with enough so that you know how to support that. And with somebody with autism whose communication, expressive communication, is really challenging, it's important to learn what they're saying or learn what their behaviors are communicating to you so that you know how to support them and recognize that it's not just acting out for the sake of acting out, but because something real is going on.
And it can be the acting out, for more things that are, sometimes they don't feel well. And so we might see them their work performance is a little off as well. So they are trying to communicate something to you, and it's usually not to just annoy you or make you have a bad day. So the skill set for Darnell, he is very energetic. He moves around a lot. This was a skill that we wanted to capitalize on. He's incredibly accurate and detail-oriented. He can pay attention to very small numbers and put things in order. And as long as he's in the right sort of environment, then he will not be distracted very easily. Very organized as well, comes to work every day and puts his things away in the same place, in the same order. Likes to use the same pen every day. Very strong work ethic too. He gets very upset if he doesn't get to come into work. He rarely gets sick, and he doesn't like to take vacations unless he has a lot of advance warning that he is going to take a vacation. Excellent memory for how to do tasks, also for names and birthdays. And his comprehension is very high. So while Alissa said sometimes there's a challenge with expressive communication, his comprehension, especially when he gets to read the instructions and have them there in front of him, is very high. So the current state of Darnell, he works in the inpatient pharmacy at a hospital. He is responsible for, they have these Joint Commission standards that they have to uphold, and they have to go through and check. They have thousands upon thousands of medications in their pharmacy being distributed to patients, and every single little pill packet has to be checked for an expiration date. So Darnell goes through every month and checks all of the medications for those that are expired and those that are about to expire. The pharmacy also, they had a change in management, and they saw Darnell's ability to move around and high energy, and also his growing need for some independence. And what they saw, they had a job, I guess an environmental need for running inpatient medications over to the outpatient infusion center. So they thought that this would be a really good test for Darnell because he'd get to work by himself some more. He'd be somewhat independent. He'd also get to move around a lot between these two units. So he is now responsible for delivering all of the medications to the patients with cancer at St. Mary's Hospital. And they have really seen an increase in the patient satisfaction rate because they're no longer waiting for their medications. So, I've already touched on the task, but delivering medications, checking for expiration dates. He also sanitizes things around the pharmacy and cuts out different labels for the medication. In his supports, he doesn't need a lot of supports for how to do the tasks because his memory is so high. Some of his supports are more behaviorally oriented and written expectations for how to behave each day. And this can be at work or if there's going to be a special function.
He does really well having a self-monitoring plan or practicing with behavior rehearsal. And if the steps are written out for him clearly, then he knows what to do and how to utilize his supports.
And this was something that we actually went in and worked with his units as well to show them how to write these plans with him to kind of let Alissa and I fade from that job site. And here is an example of his self-developed schedule and plan. They wanted to keep data on how long it takes him to make runs to the outpatient infusion center, and Darnell now does this for himself.
And Whitney had mentioned he has a strong work ethic, so his goal is to meet 12 runs each day. And when he gets that goal, he is very proud to share with anybody who will listen that he made a personal record of 12 runs that day.
So his unit really likes seeing how motivated somebody is to get their job done and to do a really high level of runs every day. And we're going to run through one more individual who presents pretty differently than the previous two individuals that we talked about. This young man's name is Paul. Paul, when you meet him, he's very quiet and mellow. He has a very calm voice. He has a very strong desire to want to fit in and belong, and not only belong with maybe some of his other peers that have autism, but also to fit in and belong with typically developing individuals as well. He desires a girlfriend. He wants to have relationships. He wants to do things outside of work. He understands humor and sarcasm. He likes to make a lot of knock-knock jokes. He likes to watch shows like Family Guy and what's the other one now, like Uncle Grandpa or something.
Robot Chicken.
And he likes to talk about those because they provide some common ground for him to talk about with other individuals. He too is somebody that prefers a routine and does like to have a lot of forewarning if there's going to be a change. But he also doesn't necessarily need it written. He does very well with verbal instructions as well. Communication. He can perseverate on topics. We mentioned that he's really into these cartoons or making jokes. A challenge for Paul is knowing when the joke is no longer funny or when he needs to stop and move on to another topic. Not always aware of boundaries in terms of joking. He's not always aware of when he has gone too far, and he also often perceives that others have gone too far. So he can be very sensitive. He can kind of dish it out, but he can't always take it. And this is a lesson that we've had to work with Paul. Does very well with visual or written communications, which is a strength, especially he works in a busy unit that gets, they get a lot of phone calls and maybe some unexpected projects. So this can come in handy with working with Paul. And he's in the process of learning to advocate for himself when he is feeling frustrated or when he feels that you have hurt his feelings. Challenges. Paul doesn't have very good proprioception, so where his body is in space, you'll often see him run into individuals or run into door frames as well. He also has what we kind of term flash anger, that you're not always exactly sure what's going to set off his fuse, but it can just be somebody just said one joke too far, and that's going to set him off. Learning to accept responsibility for his actions. So we are working with Paul and realizing, in school, sometimes the consequences are different than the consequences at work. So at school, if you got in a fight or had a temper tantrum of sorts, then the consequence is going to be a little different than if this happens in the work environment. So we're learning we're working with Paul on learning how to realize that there are consequences for your actions. And also a strong desire to be independent developmentally while still learning to be part of a team. So he wants to fit in, he wants to interact with other individuals, but he needs, sometimes while working on a team environment, it's necessary for Paul to learn that you can be independent, but you might get instructions from your supervisor, you might get instructions from a coworker, whoever's kind of taking the lead on that project. Needs, clear instructions, written or verbal, but just very clear on what you need him to go, where you need him to go, and also why. A gentle lead, we mentioned that Paul kind of has a quiet, mellow persona, and he does well when instructions are provided to him that way, since he is sensitive. He needs some time to adjust to change. He might need some time to just go for a walk or take a quick water break and then come back to work and kind of just get in his head, okay, this is the change, this is what I'm going to be doing now. Also, firm and consistent instruction and held to really high standards. He's not always going to take initiative if there's some downtime at work or if what he thought he was going to be working on is no longer available. He needs we're working with his unit on holding him to higher standards and to help them realize, and Paul realize as well, how much he's actually capable of doing.
And this is an area where the job coach can be really important because you can go in, it's important for us to be able to feel comfortable to go in and educate the unit. Now, especially somewhere where you're working on a team, you're not necessarily receiving instruction from the same person. People have different methods of delivering instruction or holding people to expectations. So if I wanted to do something when I was a teenager and my mom said no, I'd go to ask my dad because he was probably more likely to say yes. So this is something that happens with Paul when he's at work. If he is asked to do a project using the laminator and he doesn't really feel comfortable with it or he doesn't feel like using it, he'll go to somebody else and see if there's a way for him to escape from that task. So it's really important for the entire team, all of his coworkers and his supervisors to be educated on how capable he is so that people aren't letting him get away with not working and other people aren't giving him too high of expectations.
The skill set, we mentioned he's very intelligent. He is also very capable of learning new tasks, and it takes time to educate both the employers and Paul on what he can do. He's also a quick learner. He develops routines very quickly. Alyssa and I can go in and watch him learn one task one day, and we'll go make a support for him, and then we'll come back to work and realize that Paul has already developed a new method for doing this task. In the current status of Paul, he actually works in the print shop. He requires supports for break time, but once again, he doesn't really need supports for how to do a task. He does very well with modeling, and then support while he's a few times repeating whatever the task is going to be. It's usually something hands-on, and then he can usually do it independent. He's needed supports for break time, how long it's appropriate to take a break for, things that are appropriate to do during break time. Paul is someone that does very well with social stories that he can read on his own so that everyone, he doesn't like to feel different than his coworkers. So the social stories we've actually put on his iPod so he can read those on his own before he goes to work. And it's also completely normal for someone, a young man like Paul, to be walking around with an iPod. And also, we spend the majority of our time not doing job task supports, but doing social and communication supports, working with Paul and learning how to have appropriate conversations, tell appropriate jokes, learn how many times it's okay to say a joke and when he needs to move on. That's all we have for today. Thank you.